Welcome, I'm Michael Bickert. Thanks for joining me today as we explore concepts with the objective of improving your management skills and growing your business. Grab that notepad, grab a pen. I want you to take notes. I want you to make a commitment to yourself that you will jot down some sort of action item that you can implement in your business today. And you're gonna wanna take notes because we're covering an essential topic today. Somebody asked me to cover this topic. I think I've touched on this before in at least one other video, but we're gonna go maybe a little more in depth or cover it from a little bit of a different angle, and that is projections. So what you should do right now is pause the video and go and grab your company projections. Or let me ask you this, where are you on the trajectory? Are you ahead of what you've been projecting year to date? Are you ahead of where you were this time last year? Do you know? Is it completely conjecture? Do you actually know exactly where you stand? If you don't, or if you can't, pause this video and go grab your projections or open them up on the screen or something like that, then this video is for you because you need to be able to do that. Now, the term projections is also referred to as targets, or in many corporate cultures, they talk about budgets. I'm gonna use those terms interchangeably, synonymously today. So I would argue there's slight differences between what someone might mean when they say that or how it's used, but it really doesn't matter as long as we have sort of some agreement, or within your company culture, you use the same term and everybody understands what it means. So I'll predominantly talk about projections or targets. I think of budgets slightly different, even though I completely get that it's synonymous in many corporate cultures. So let's get started in looking at this. And what I'm going to do to cover this concept is sort of use the 5 W's: who, what, when, where, why, and also we'll dabble into how, and maybe there'll be some peripheral issues that we need to discuss near the end. But I think it's really imperative that you have projections, you have targets that you can reference. So let's start with the what. What are we talking about? When I talk about projections or targets, you know, these are your goals. And what exactly, how do I define that? What do I need to put together? Well, the good news is there's no hard and fast rules. There are only best practices. And I would say, of course, we always talk about performance analytics. These are measurements, particular indices or a metric or a series of metrics that you use to gauge the performance of your business. And your targets, your projections are just that. They fall under the umbrella of that. So all projections, all targets are a form of performance analytics, performance metrics. These are measurements of how your business is doing. When I talk about it, I want to have at least 3 or 4 particular measurements that we look at. And it's going to vary depending on the type of business you have and the type of industry, but I want to look at our revenues and sales. Now, depending again on your business, most of you will notice that your revenues are made up almost entirely, if not entirely, of sales. There are other forms of revenues you can have, like investment income, interest income that you may be earning, some rental income, these types of things that are not sales. But most of you, when you talk about your revenues, you're really using that term, again, synonymously with sales. So sales is one of the things that I want you to project. I want you to have targets on sales. Another one would be profit. And there are different levels of profit. And depending on how you use your targets, your projections, you may want to use net profit or operating profit, this kind of thing. I think a real best practice is to use operating profit, especially if you are sharing this information and you are analyzing this information and strategizing on this information with other primary stakeholders in your organization, who maybe you look at on this on a more granular level by department or by product category, by service that you offer, this kind of thing. And the reason I say that looking at operating profit, not net profit, is below on the income statement, below the line where you've calculated your operating profit, there may be some expenses that are completely outside the control of certain stakeholders, certain other managers that you're going through this with. And the degree to which that's the case can make it less relevant to talk about net profit, because they may get discouraged thinking, hey, there's one example might be a particular form of business tax, or your rent factor, these kinds of things where your managers may say, well, I have no control over that, boss. I can't control that. I can't bring down our rent or our taxes. So why are we looking at that as a performance metric that I'm being measured by, and that my performance is being gauged by? So that's where operating profit. But anyway, getting back to it, we're going to talk about sales as a best practice. We're going to talk about profit as a best practice. And then look to your particular type of business and look at two, or one or two, or maybe even three more primary things that are performance indicators that are really important to you. And so I think of, as an example, number of customers, number of clients that we have, or that kind of thing. So depending on your business, it may be something different than that. It may be some sort of volume production or something like that. You may also look at number of services, but I don't want this to become your report card. We want to differentiate between your targets and your projections that I'm going to talk about today from your other performance metrics that we make up your report card. There's definitely some overlap there, and as we said earlier, that all of your targets that we're talking about today fall under the umbrella of your performance metrics in general and your report card. But I want to keep it simple today, and when we talk about the what, define those 3 or 4 primary things, because I'm going to recommend that you report these in a way that is visually appealing. And if you get too convoluted, if you get too granular, too detailed, you get too many things on there, then it becomes just a blur, and people don't know where to focus. So the what, the definition is, it's a performance metric, or rather it's a series of performance metrics. Try as a best practice to narrow that to your 3 or 4 top ones. I definitely think you need to have sales in there. Definitely think you need to measure profit. And I'm using as an example that we're going to measure number of clients as well. Okay, so that's the what. Now, what about the who? The who should be involved? Who needs to prepare these? Well, for starters, I'm addressing those entrepreneurs, those business owners, those managers and aspiring managers. You need to be involved. So the person who is at the head of the organization should make the final decision in collaboration and communication with the rest of the stakeholders of how we're going to put this stuff together. What are those primary metrics that we are going to target, that we are going to project, and then a final decision is made of what's going to go into that. But it should be certainly a collaboration between management. So the who, in terms of who decides what's going into it, is going to be those people that these projections and targets are most relevant to, and who are those people that are going to be using that. This should be your management team at minimum. You can use this throughout your entire organization, but at minimum it should be your management team. And if you don't have a team of managers, and maybe it's just yourself and a business partner, or yourself and a spouse running a small business, then the two of you are the who involved here. And you may want to consider, is there someone else on the team that would really benefit from seeing this? And we'll get into why that might be the case a little bit later as we talk. So we've covered the what and the who. What about the when? Well, in terms of timing, you want to make sure that you are projecting and targeting each and every year. And the time frames that you're looking for is to target no less than a year in advance. I like to target for at least the fiscal year. If that's different than your calendar year, or different than the calendar year, I should say, then make sure that you are considering whether you're going to target for the fiscal or the calendar year. And some people, some organizations like to project further out than that, maybe have a 5-year plan. I think there's some merit in doing that, but the further out that you project, the less accurate that it's going to be, and the more difficult the process becomes. So I'm going to suggest that as a starter, choose your fiscal year and project out for a fiscal year. And also, as part of the when, is you should be projecting for both annual basis and monthly basis. And then when we talk about what we're looking at, we're going to look at these things month to date, like how did we perform on the month, how are we performing so far in the year, and we're going to compare that to previous months, and we're going to compare that to previous years as well in terms of projections. Okay, so that's the when. Monthly, yearly, project out that far, and also in terms of the when we review that. So we've covered the what, the who, when, and the where. Where are we going to use this information? I think you need to use this information, like we said, monthly, and where is in some sort of management review, some sort of meeting that you're going to have with your team where you're going to use this stuff. And that can be in a virtual, or it can be in a boardroom, or that kind of thing. But the where isn't that important as long as you definitely are meeting together and using this information and reviewing it. There's no sense whatsoever in terms of putting this information together and not using it. Now I want to go back to who for a second here, because I realized I forgot something. You may decide that you are going to use your accounting team to actually prepare the documents, or it may be something administrative. Maybe the information is easily acquired by somebody who administratively can put this stuff together for you. And we'll talk about the details about how you should display this information. But in terms of the who, I would consider for sure getting your accountant or your accounting team involved in compiling the information so that there's somebody who's sort of accountable for the accuracy of the information. And it's put together, and you're reviewing this each month. And so we've covered the who, what, when, and where. Now we have to cover the why. Why should you do this? You need to do this so that you can know exactly where your business stands. You don't want to be flying by the seat of your pants haphazardly, day in and day out, basing everything on perception. Oftentimes, perception is at variance with reality, and you might realize that you think things are going really well, but they're not, and for whatever reason. But by having this information in front of you, then you have the facts, and then you can, if it's like I said, if it's incongruent with your perception, then you can research and explore and find out why. You can investigate and try to ascertain, why am I so far behind where I thought I'd be at this time of the year? Or why is our performance pacing behind what it was this time last year, last month, or whatever? And that should prompt you to ask good questions. The other part of why is because by asking those good questions, you're going to strategize. You and your team are going to collaborate on a strategy to improve things, continuously be improving things. And if you are not pacing for where you thought you'd be, what you projected, what you're targeting for, then the why becomes, well, we need to plan better. We need to understand things better. And those businesses that do this will outperform the competitors who do not do this. You can't just be reactive day in and day out. You need to be looking at things on a grander scale, monthly and annually, and planning surrounding that. So we've talked about so that you get no surprises, so you know where you stand, and that you can strategize. The other thing that falls into the category of why is the alignment of incentives. When you're meeting with your primary stakeholders, those other members of the management team or your business partners, your spouse, or whoever else is really involved in the business and has a vested interest in the success of the business, and you're looking at the targets, you are probably deciding to remunerate people based on the performance, and you're probably rewarding them in some way and recognizing them in some way based on the achievement of targets or failing to achieve targets. And what that will do is it will necessarily involve a conversation about the fairness of that. And so you will find that you might get some pushback if a person is thinking that the remuneration or the recognition is unjustified for whatever reason. And that those discussions ensue, and what should result from that is more alignment of incentives. You want your entire team to be aligned. You all want to be rowing in the same direction. You want to make sure that everybody has the same goal, the same objectives, the same targets. So that's what targeting can do. That's a really important thing. So we're strategizing, we're aligning incentives, and this is leading to good questions and investigation for better planning. So that's the why. Now, what about the how? The how relates to the what. I left out in the what that really, when we're defining projections and targets, these are guesses. And the extent to which it's a guess versus or an educated guess, or how educated of a guess it becomes, is related to how long you've been in business. So those of you who've been around a long time, several years, maybe decades, you should have more data points to go back to. So in terms of how, what I would do is I would accumulate my previous year's financial statements, and I would, if you haven't already done this, I would sort of plot that and on a graph and look at where on those 3 or 4 metrics that we talked about that you're going to do this for, what have we been accomplishing in the past? And are you on a growth trajectory? Is each year growing by a little bit, or is there a greater growth one year than another, and why? Take a look at this stuff, and that will help you to extrapolate educated guesses of what the future holds. Remember, it's a projection into the future. You don't have a crystal ball. The best way to look at the future is to look at the past and try to predict using that information. If you're brand new, it's much more of a guess. And then you're going to have to project based on your business plan and what it is that you think is going to happen in your market. So remember that it is all a guess, and that should take some of the pressure off you when you understand that this is not a multiple choice, and this is not a test. It's not about who can predict the future the best. You're trying to use this to motivate you. I guess that's another part of the why, to drive you, to provide some sort of guidance, the goal, the target, the projection. This is something to keep your eyes on so that you head that way. You know where when you're driving a car, that you will tend to go in the direction that you look. And if you look off to the side for too long, all of a sudden you wander and your car ends up in the ditch. The same thing with targets and projections. Is it's something to keep your eye on and get you going in that trajectory. And as I say, it's not a contest for accuracy. It's great if you outperform your targets. If you were projecting a little bit too conservative, and you exceeded that, that's great. You maybe then say the next time you do your projections a year later, you would probably, if there wasn't something else, if you realized, well, I was a little too conservative in the past and the conditions are the same, you would probably project a little bit more aggressive in terms of growth. But so when we look backward and we look at the data that we have to give us a more educated guess, we're going to look at where we were, and we're going to plot that, and we're going to compare year over year. What is the, say, percentage of growth that you're experiencing? And if you have 5 years of data that you're looking at, what is the average growth over the last 5 years? Maybe your company is growing by 10% per year. And in terms of the actual sales, remember, this is on different metrics. It could be sales that you're growing by 10% per year. It could be your operating profit. It could be the number of clients that you have, or whatever. You could even be looking at your employees, but I already left that up to you. You can determine what are those most important things that you are trying to measure to gauge performance, and what is the growth trajectory. And then you just assign that. So if you said, well, we have been growing on average 10% per year, then I guess we're probably going to grow by 10% this year. Now, here's the other factor that you want to build in. we said it's an educated guess. So the best part of the education comes from looking at the history and your previous data points. The other part are to look at anything that has changed. Is there a reason to believe that you will have a steep increase in your growth trajectory? Like maybe you're going to grow by 20 or 25% this year, not 10%, but you have rationale behind that. Behind that guess, there's a reason for that. You might look at your market and you might say, the economy's booming right now and everything's on fire. It's really heating up in my market. My industry has become very popular. It took a while for us to, maybe my brand is now much better known. Maybe you look back at your data points and you saw that you were flat for a couple of years, and then you grew by 5%, then you grew by 10, and you're getting an exponential component to your growth curve, and you want to assign a greater growth. But really what I was getting at in terms of besides the data points in the history that you look at, is you also look at the market. So you look, is there some change in the market that may help us to grow faster or that may hinder our growth? Is there reason to believe that we may not grow this year at all? Maybe we are going to take a hit because of something that we know that is going on in this particular market right now at this particular time. So assign those, and sometimes you can get resources from the government or from other like lending institutions, and banks will commonly put together sort of a economic outlook. Take a look at the pundits out there who publicly publish statistics on what they are projecting. There are many of those out there, and in my market the banks do this, and you can get your hands on that information, and to the degree that it's relevant to your business, it can be very useful in your projecting. You can look at those, and remember, these people are guessing too. Nobody has a crystal ball or a time machine where you can know for sure what's going to happen. So these are all just methods for trying to get more accurate projections, more accurate predictions, more accurate guesses from which you can formulate these targets. Now, I mentioned your market. There can be other things you look at, and I would say your industry also falls under the umbrella of market, but you're looking, are there any big changes in the market or in your industry? What about internally? Is there something that has changed internally? Maybe you've changed your ownership. Maybe this is a business that you purchased that has been around for many years, but you have a better plan. You've got a more aggressive plan for taking things forward. What about management? Is there some change in management? Have you acquired some human resources to your team that are going to impact your projections? Maybe you've lost a critical team member that was really imperative in terms of helping you drive growth, or maybe you've recruited some talent and you've acquired somebody on your team that is likely to increase the growth that you're expecting. These things. What about equipment or facility? Maybe your capacities were greatly impacted in the past, but you've recently made an investment to increase your capacities. You've added the great widget maker 5000 to your assembly line, and now you have reason to believe we are going to be able to produce far more product than we were able to in the past. Maybe you've increased the size of your team in terms of capacity. So look inwardly at your company and ascertain, have you done something that is going to increase capacities? Have you done something, made some sort of investment or commitment that is likely to increase demand for your product or service? Maybe you've taken on a new commitment to marketing and you are advertising, your brand is getting out there. You've made a real commitment to, over the last number of months, to word of mouth and networking and that kind of stuff, and you're starting to see things pay off. You notice these changes, or you're cognizant of these changes, and therefore you apply that to your guesswork. You apply that to your projections, and you maybe factor up or down in terms of, you calculate slightly different than you would. So it's not like just because you grew at a particular rate for the last 5 years, that's what's going to happen this year. You also have to look at market changes and changes in your business and apply those. Now, another best practice as you put these things together is make sure that whoever's creating these, whoever is making the predictions, the projections, the targets, they're committed to them and they can substantiate their rationale. Remember, it is just a guess. They don't have to prove for sure this is going to happen. Of course, nobody can do that, but you want them committed to it. So a best practice would be for you to have a person justify where their numbers came from. And if you are the boss, if you are the general manager, you're the president, you're the place that the buck stops, you need to sort of approve these and say, yeah, I can live with these. If a person you know is really sort of lowballing you in terms of their targets because of a bonus or remuneration part of their plan or something like this, or they just like getting patted on the back, you want to make sure that you approve this based on something that's realistic. So if somebody is being far too conservative for whatever reason and you just don't agree with it, you're like, oh, that's not acceptable, then push back and say to your people, no, I expect, and then you can give your rationale, I expect us to grow more than this, or I hired you specifically so that we could grow by a greater level than this. And this is part of both aligning the incentives as well as communicating your expectations. You need to tell your people, look, I'm expecting us to grow by 20% this year, not 10%, or whatever the numbers happen to be. It is incumbent upon you to clarify your expectations. That's one of your obligations. Hold them accountable. But what I was really talking about here is getting people to substantiate. They may say something you hadn't thought of. You're expecting them to come back and to say that they're going to grow by 15%, and they come back and they say they're going to grow by 10%. And then they share something with you and they tell you why inventory is going to be short, or a particular raw material that you rely on is going to be missing, and you're not sure how to source that yet, or there is somebody that's maybe going on maternity leave or something like that that's critical to your sales, to your profitability, and you haven't been able to execute a plan for a replacement for that extra sales or whatever, and you go, oh, that's a good point, yes, thank you very much. This is what you're doing. You're getting them to substantiate the rationale behind their projections, behind their targets. Or it may be the opposite. It may be that you were expecting them to come back at 15%, they came by 20%, and you don't want to discourage the team. You don't want to be in a meeting every month where you miss target over and over again and you think it's a little too aggressive, and you say, but then they may give you the rationale and they say, oh, but don't forget, we've got this new product we've been investing in and we're rolling it out this year. That should have incremental sales. And you go, that's a really good point. You may say, well, I'm the boss. I know all these things are not going to surprise me, but let your people substantiate where they're coming from and give you the rationale and explain themselves. And then there's a bit of a negotiation where you mutually agree on things. Don't browbeat somebody into accepting your target. This can be really revealing and eye-opening for you about what your team is thinking, and that may lead to a lot of other discussions. So that is the best practice. Make sure that you have people sign off on it, and then document those things that they say. Put that in a document somewhere. I think it's a great idea to have a person sign that in some way, that they're committed to this, and that you can go back to it. You can reference it when we talk in the future. Like if you're not quite hitting the numbers and as part of that rationale, they said, remember boss, we have that new product that we're going to be launching this year and we expect that to lead to incremental sales. You can revisit that. You can say, hey, what is going on? Would you expect it to be at 20% and we're only at 10% growth? And they could say, oh, there was a delay in the rollout of that new product. And there's all that sort of back and forth that occurs. But the point that I was making is documenting the rationale and the key reasons. Not, they may have 100 reasons of why they're optimistic that things are going to go really well. Document the key ones and have a person sign off on it that they're committed to it. There's something about a person having to put their name to it, sign off on it, and have an approval from the boss that really helps with the commitment level. So that's a best practice. The next thing I want to get into is how are you going to use these in terms of display? How are you going to present the information? And I think it's imperative not just to present numbers on a screen. A spreadsheet is a very boring way of presenting this stuff. Have a visual aid, so some sort of graphical interface for the people that are using this. And if it's just you using it, I still recommend this. So what I would recommend are graphs, and I recommend two types of graphs, a bar graph and a line graph. Your bar graph, you will present your monthly actual performance versus your monthly target. And then also your year-to-date actual performance versus your year-to-date target. So those are the bar graphs you're looking at. In the line graph, you want to see the trajectory, and I would recommend, in addition to plotting the individual points of how we're doing each month, that might show you going up and down, or they might be plotting that you're going up in terms of sales. Remember, there's 3 or 4 graphs that you're going to use for, or you can have different lines on the same graph. I suppose I would recommend you use different graphs so you can focus on one thing at a time. But I also want you to put a trend line on there and see what is the trend. You know, you might go down this month, but the trend year to date is we are pacing for ahead of what we said we were going to. So it's like no need to hit the panic button now, especially if you can identify why you were down this month and that it's something that's temporary and likely to change course for the next month. So consider putting together both bar graphs and line graphs, not just a spreadsheet for this. Of course, the numbers have to be entered somewhere in a spreadsheet or a database, and it's from that database or from that spreadsheet that these bar graph and line graphs will be created. That is really important, and I think the best practice to have that trend line in there should also go in your notes. Once you start this and you make this a habit and you're really committed to this, it will become easier and easier, and it'll become more and more useful to you. You will find yourself relying on this as a part of your management, a part of your best practices of how you run your business, keeping your finger on the pulse of where things are headed. And this, remember, the whole point, this stimulates conversation that leads to better planning for the future. It leads to strategies. It leads to investigation, to finding out why are we having some data points that are outliers? Why are we way off here or whatever? And it keeps you, everybody becomes a better manager by doing this. This will make you more effective. And it also helps you, like I want to remind you, to align incentives. So don't be dictatorial and don't just show up in these meetings and make it an uncomfortable position for a person who missed target or whatever. Instead, make it constructive. There's nothing wrong with criticism. There's nothing wrong with holding a person accountable. That's imperative. You need to do that with your team, but do it in such a way that they understand you're here to help them and you will help them achieve. You're all going in the same direction. That's why the alignment of incentives is so good. Make it really celebratory when you are ahead of targets. And then of course, if once again you were too conservative in setting your targets, you can amend that for the future. That's why I say it gets easier in time. The next time you do this, back to the when again, next year we're going to redo this before the end of the year. We're going to see how did we do, how accurate were our guesses, our targets, our projections, and we're going to look at that as another data point. That's historical. And then we're going to look again to the future. What resources external can we look at to determine what may be changing in the market? What is the environment in which we compete? Is there something changing? Is there a competitor, a major new competitor in my local market that is going to affect the amount of growth I can expect? Or did a competitor go under and am I going to pick up market share? All the changes, you're looking at these things and asking yourself, and you're going to apply that more and more readily. You'll become more accustomed to how to do this. Now, I just gave a few examples there, but the underlying thing comes down to changes in your market, in your industry, or in your organization. Apply that to your historical data. The combination of those things should give you some fairly good place to start in terms of making educated guess to do your projections or targets. So we've went on a long time about this. I think there's undoubtedly I've left out some key things and examples that you may have thought of that will really help you to create targets for your business, to create projections that are relevant for you and your team to guide your business forward. And I'd love to hear from you on that. So make sure that you leave a comment. When you leave a comment like this, everybody who's watching the video, who scrolls down and reads these comments, we all learn from that. And we need to learn from one another. Perpetual refinement.